Hello.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining. I am Pete Campion, and we have
Sarah.
Sarah talking with us today. We're going to talking you through the art of facilitation, which sounds very grand, doesn't it? But we're both insight directors here at Cora, and we run insight teams. They're doing ad hoc kind of work day to day. We'll talk a little bit more about in a second. But we're coming from a perspective of having worked across two different parts of the business, where we have our insight perspective, what we would refer to as our microscope, being able to deep dive into kind of strategic challenges for our clients, whilst also having our microscope, which would be our subscription service, right?
Yeah, so hopefully we've got lots of interesting perspectives to share with you today on facilitation. Um, I think it's worth just reflecting that we are both in that sort of insight world dealing with clients. And so obviously our experience of facilitation is quite different, right?
Mm.
We facilitate sessions with some of you listening in. We facilitate sessions with respondents, obviously slightly different to our clients who are doing more of that internal
Mm.
facilitation. But hopefully we can bring some interesting perspectives. I think even when we're facilitating with respondents, it's
Mm.
taught us a lot about how to manage those
Mm.
conversations.
I think particularly as well when we do kind of co-creation elements where you've got
Mm,
both, right? We have stakeholders as well as consumers being able to understand the dynamics there and how to plan ahead and make sure you ultimately get to the goal that you're looking to.
yeah. Yeah. And we wanted to reflect on this topic because it is tough. You are going into these sessions not only having to facilitate so just different types of sessions. So sometimes it might be that alignment session where you're kicking something off with your stakeholders, having to scope out what they need and the objectives. It might be something more creative, like you were saying, sort of co-creation,
Mm.
or you're going into a meeting where you're asking your stakeholders to come up with ideas and spark that creative thinking. Or I think some of the tough ones are those decision meetings where you go in and you have to come out of it with a plan and agreement on something. So hopefully, what we're going to share today applies to all of these different scenarios.
And I suppose what we wanted to do is just kind of frame this a little bit about like what is the kind of the goal here? What does good look like in terms of that type of facilitation, regardless of the objectives that we were kind of talking about there, what you're trying to get out of it. There are kind of two dynamics you need to take into account when in terms of getting to that end point. And I think one of those things is empathy, being able to actually be able to show that you understand the people you're dealing with, being able to account for their situations, how they're coming into the room and how they deal or react to things. And the other is providing structure, being able to ensure that it's not this free for all kind of like chaos as such, and that you actually end up with uh, where you need to be. So what we're trying to aim for is this top right, where we have power and direction. We come out with a real sense of positive results. People feel really good about that. They feel like they've contributed and they've got to that goal, and they're kind of got a clear sense of how they're going to take that on forwards. Where we don't want to be ending up in these other boxes, right, where we are kind of aimless, or perhaps we end up in boredom, or even infighting, or we have this kind of like everyone feels very good about it, but there's like so what to it. We haven't achieved what we aim and set out to do.
Yeah. I think that empathy is really important, isn't it? Because a lot of these people are coming into meetings obviously trying to look a certain way. You want to look good in the meeting, everyone else wants to look
Yeah,
good. So it's understanding
yeah,
that.
absolutely.
And part of that empathy is thinking about all of the cognitive biases that are going on that are going to be shaping the discussion in these meetings. If some of you listening in have been to our previous bias session, you might be familiar with some of these, but we just thought worth reflecting on a couple that come into play at any meeting. So, authority bias is the sensation of being drawn to the person in the room, the voice that has the most sort of expertise, or at least perceived expertise, or seniority in the area. We sort of trust their voice, we go to their opinion. And in meetings, that is huge. If you have someone who is much more senior, you'll probably all be in that meeting, kind of witnessing everyone nodding along and kind of going with what they say. Curse of knowledge is almost a bit of a flip of that. This is when you have someone who is really, really close to whatever you're discussing and will get into the technicalities of it. But the danger is they assume that everyone else has that shared knowledge. So you can
Mm,
probably think of scenarios where you have someone kind of really going into the detail and sort of blank faces around the rest of the room as they're not taken on the journey. Status quo is one that probably comes into play more at those creative meetings where you're asking people to come up with ideas because as humans, we don't like newness. It's really hard to come up with new ideas, so you've got to get them to sort of spark inspiration. And law of triviality, I suppose it's sort of similar as well in the thinking of solutions and newness is hard. And law of triviality is basically the feeling that we spend more time, a disproportionate time, on the really trivial, granular things because they feel easier to solve. And we almost push the big issues under the carpet, and we don't sort of solve those because it's just too hard. Then a couple of others, confirmation bias. This is absolutely huge. This would come into meetings and probably any sort of work interaction. This is the sort of uh, inclination to be drawn to beliefs or opinions that confirm our pre-held beliefs. So when people are going into these scenarios, they will have their own agenda. They will know what opinion they've already got, and they will listen to other voices in the room that sort of confirm that. And then peak end rule, we'll touch a bit more on the end. This is that when we look back on experiences, we give disproportionate value to the peak of an experience, which could either be a real sort of high point or a real low point, or the end of the experience. So you could have an absolutely brilliant session, loads of discussion, but it ends on a low point, and then that's what people go
mhm,
away and remember. So we'll come back to that at the end of how you can end on that high.
mhm,
So we're going to talk through the different stages of facilitation. So preparing for the sessions, actually being in them and how you navigate that conversation, and then galvanizing action at the end, as Pete said, making sure everyone feels like they've achieved and they've got to that goal. So thinking about preparing, I think the first crucial thing is just to agree your North Star. So that's like your purpose of the meeting, right? So what are you ultimately trying to get out of
mm,
this session? And share that. Don't keep that
mm,
close to your chest. Share before the session so everyone goes into the room or goes onto the Zoom knowing exactly what that meeting is for. Um, and I think also, even at the start of that session, remind people of it. You often have the start of a meeting where everyone's running late, they come in,
mm,
and then you kind of go, oh, okay, well, we're running late, let's get into it. That's sort of dangerous
mm,
because you risk them going off on tangents and not being clear on that objective.
mm.
If you go on.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think an interesting bit on that I heard it phrased was like ensuring everyone knows why they're there, not just
Mm,
what they're doing, but like why they're doing it.
mm,
Because the worst scenario is you start on something, you're halfway through, and people go, why are we doing this? Like,
mm.
what's the purpose of doing
Yeah,
this? Like, it's really key,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah.
Mm,
And it means you can go through this like messy bit where you can then go off on tangents because you've set that why and you can kind of come back to it at the end. The other thing is to just think about your audience. Who have you invited? Have you got some more senior voices in the room that are going to hold that authority bias? Do you have those people really close that are in danger of going into the technicalities? Are there clashes? All of this helps you come up with a bit of a game plan so you can start to think about logistics that could mitigate that. So if you're going to have little breakout discussions, you can start to think which personalities you do and don't want to pair together. If you've got some big voices in the room, do you need to think about allowing more time for individual thinking so you hear from everyone? So, yeah, Pete will come into this in a lot more detail on how you actually do that and what some tasks might look like. And then the final bit is thinking about logistics. It sounds obvious, but I think this is where the empathy really comes in of understanding that your stakeholders are coming into the room with so much else on their mind. They might be thinking, oh God, I don't have time for this today. They might be checking their emails in the meeting, just empathizing that with that and recognizing that your time is so valuable and therefore putting a plan in place that really sort of recognizes it, makes sure you get the most out of it, but also gets them out of that bubble, means that they are fully committed to the session. So thinking about tasks and energizers, and yeah, you've got some great examples coming up. I think also just thinking of some sort of lower level tasks. You might be going into a discussion that's more open. It's not like creative task based, but having a different way of asking a question or some way to sort of challenge conversation if you get stuck in a rut is always good to have in your back pocket. Physical space. So if you've got a room, you're doing it in person, how does that affect your tasks? What sort of space do you need? Also, can you take them to a space that gets them out of that bubble? Is there a meeting room that you never really go to, or a nice airy meeting room that has a good view? Something that means they're not going to be just doors down from their desk and thinking what they need to get back to. And then logistics. So obviously avoid moments where they're just not going to be engaged Monday morning, Friday afternoon. Make sure you genuinely have enough time and get people to sort of commit to that time so you know that they are really present in that meeting. Oh.
Speaking of being in that meeting, I think one of the key things, as we kind of alluded to there, is just like ensuring that when you start quite purposefully. You kind of command respect, and you also just command a clear sense of everyone is aligned on this. So part of that is obviously aligning on that North Star again, right? Making that front and center, making sure people are very, very clear why they're there, as well as what they're going to be doing in their time there. I suppose from being a qualitative specialist and doing this obviously in person, as well as doing lots of groups and co-creation, I think one thing that I think is more important than anything in terms of managing a room is not as much about what you do in the session itself, the meat of it as such, although it's important. It's about how you set your stall out in the beginning, setting your role out, introducing who else you're facilitating with, what they're going to be doing, and what the ground rules are. That there will be a break. It's going to take this on. We're going to take it. I need everyone back in their seats at this time. I want you off your phones. Like if you're online, I want cameras on. Like these kind of things, setting those expectations is really important because you can then hold people accountable to them rather than introducing these things later, which may feel unreasonable if people are feeling busy and kind of stressed. And finally, that kind of energize in terms of that task. I think people always kind of cringe a little bit at the idea of something like an icebreaker, but it's really about what makes it not cringe is tailoring it to your purpose. Like if you know that people in the room don't necessarily know each other, a great way to start, we often do is like a bingo card exercise where you have different experiences. I failed my driving test, I've lived in another country, whatever it may be, and someone has to be able to go around and tick off as many people as they can. If you know it's about creativity or getting people out of their heads, little games like Dobble or little bits of Lego or something like that, again, just gets you out of that system one into system two, as well as maybe you just need to make it fun. It's not going to be that exciting session. You need to bring some fun into it. Could you do a little taste test of like different coffees or foods or things that are from nearby your office or whatever it may be? Like just something to spark and add energy from the get-go.
I think a lot of this is interesting because it's almost flipping that authority bias on its head and using that bias to your advantage
Mm.
because all of this sets you up as the authority. If I'm running this session, these are the ground rules, this is how it's going to go. And then
Yeah,
it is so much more seamless after that, isn't it?
absolutely. And then when you're kind of into it, I think it's about retaining that control. Like you've set that stall out, you're then going to manage it. And we also alluded to it in terms of planning ahead, knowing who, if you are perhaps going to be doing some sort of breakout or like the dynamics involved, making sure people are sat in the right places. You've got someone super senior with lots of knowledge. They're not going to absolutely cower over someone who maybe doesn't have that. They're maybe paired with someone who can match them or work with it. But I think there's that planning, but there's also observing that in the room, observing the dynamics, seeing if some of those biases are coming to play and adapting to that, being able to say, well, we're going to move you over here now. Or actually, I've heard quite a bit from you. Let's hear from so and so. Like, don't be afraid as a facilitator to be quite upfront of that, especially when you set your stall at the beginning, saying, I want to hear from everyone. No one here is a passenger to what you're trying to do. And equally, yes, and just showing that those partnerships and things that complement each other. in person, I think particularly, and I'll come on to online how this is really important as well as body language to be able to encourage or discourage. I think we've all been in sessions, haven't we, right? Where people dominate that room, you can't stop them, or
Mm.
perhaps they don't talk, they're shy and they hold back. Like your body language is really important to show that you are either encouraging someone to open up, leaning forward, kind of open arm
Mm.
gestures, things like that, or perhaps you're discouraging. Maybe you start to face away a little bit, or direct your attention to other people. Show that perhaps, as much you've heard from them, and you got to be clear, right? Go, thank you for that. It's great. I just want to hear from X, Y, and Z as well. They understand why that's the case, so they don't feel fobbed off,
Mm.
but they understand that there's there. And equally, I think in those instances, some people love to keep going, and I think having a car park, what we would term it as, like BS slide that you can dump things onto, or a notepad or post-its, be able to say that's really interesting. I'm just going to write it down here so we don't lose it, but I want
Mm.
to keep us on track with what we're trying to do, ensuring that anything that doesn't take you too off tangent.
Mm. I also often say with body language, it can be a good thing for the energy as well. Like if you are in a room, like stand up every so often. If the
Yeah,
energy's flat, I think we're
absolutely.
so used to being in those big meeting rooms, all sat on our laptops. If you just stand up and go, right, we're going to do this now, it
Mm.
just instantly
No,
changes.
it's a really good point. I think particularly in person, not just the standing up, but also moving around the room. You
Mm.
getting to move around the room, but also getting others to move around the room
Mm.
keeps things dynamic and
Yeah.
stops things falling down in energy wise,
Yeah.
absolutely. Which which speaking of in terms of energy, is about the other part of that is not just the control, it's about ensuring that that energy stays high, isn't it? Because I think part of that would be recognizing people's contributions, like not just saying, okay, great, moving on. It's showing that something that they said, playing back is often a really valuable part of this. It's making sure that you show that you've listened, as well as making sure that you've actually understood it and they have opportunity to build or correct in it, especially if it's a valuable point. You can give that room to open up discussion further and make sure everyone's clear and they can build on it. And just make sure people feel validated, especially if someone's a bit shy, like showing
Mm.
that that's really interesting and I really take this away from it gives them the encouragement to keep contributing. As well as not just that, but being able to, again, I think part of that energy, being able to change things up, move people into pairs to work on things, move into mini groups, often as well, even just to kind of take their own time and think about their own thoughts and then contribute, puts a little less pressure on people coming up with things themselves as such and making they can contribute to a whole
Mm.
group. But it sets an accountability, like you three have to go off and you have to come back with three ideas,
Mm.
or you have to decide what you think the most important action of our day is, whatever it may be. It helps feel that broader accountability and unity in the group. I think this is really important. Breaks often are put in and then they feel a bit optional, or we rush through them as much as you can, valuing them and giving them a decent amount of time. Even we were talking about a session the other day where I was thinking, oh, it's going to be a 2 hour session, a 1.5 hour session. It's like, no, let's make that 2 hours and make there's a
Mm.
good gap in there so people can really re-energize, especially if you're dealing with stakeholders. They can go and answer emails, they can deal with things, make sure that you understand and show that empathy. And just break it up with some fun. I think that not thinking that and those energizer exercises are just about the beginning, recognizing energy dips and like bringing in some of those games in
Mm.
particular. They don't always have to have the purpose of like trying to introduce people, connect people with something. It might just be a bit of fun, and it
Mm.
can be 5 minutes and can be really fast and
Mm.
furious and build that energy up again.
Mm. And I think your point about being flexible with that and just being mindful of when the dips do happen is a really
Mm,
good one because you might not need to do it. It might be high energy, but
yeah.
yeah, being flexible.
Mhm. And I think I just pointed out like some differences that how this may look online versus in person. Because I think
Mm.
from our experience in Insight and ad hoc work in particular, we will notice that a lot. Obviously, being qualitative or kind of moderate sessions in person as well as online, and you can see these nuances where you might just need to focus your energy or your emphasis. I think in person. Absolute golden rule is assigning roles, being able to go
Mm.
into that session knowing it's not just you, and I think that's a really important thing, never underestimating thinking I can just manage this whole thing myself. I
Mm.
always kind of have a bit of a rule of just add one more person than you think you
Mm.
need because you just don't know how that day is going to go. And
Mm.
you also just think there might just be things that come up and that you will be grateful for that second or third pair of
Mm.
hands. It's jobs like having another co-facilitator, someone you can pass back and forth with and take a kind of give you a bit of a break, but also keep the energy high. online. It might be someone who just what we term as like vibe watching, like who can keeps a sense of like what is the mood in the room. Do we need to introduce that energizer now, or do we need to leave it? Timekeeping, obviously, really important. I think one of Laura and I were talking about the other day is doorkeeper, someone whose job is to make sure that everyone gets welcome and understands where they are, and if they come a bit late, that they get up to speed is really important because you don't want that to disrupt the flow of a session if you're then having to start again. So yeah, that doesn't mean you have to have someone for each of those roles. People can play multiple roles, right? But I think that's really important. Being there as well, just set up early, just turn up an hour early, make sure the room is absolutely as you expect it to be. There will always be things that you don't think you thought that should be there and they're not there. Your whiteboard's not there, the tech's not working. Just making sure that when you start at 9 o'clock on the dot, wherever it is, everything is good. Like you've got it all sorted. And I think particularly the tone, I think we've kind of alluded to it, but in the room, you need to command that space. So ensuring that you're really emphatic about, the whys and what those rules are and your purpose is really important so that you are respected and listened to. And that when you clap your hands or you wave them around or you shout like we're going to move on, people don't keep talking. I think it's really important.
Yeah.
And there's a contrast, I think there's online, which I think is actually often, particularly in a more stakeholder setting, it's harder. Like you can't. It depends on the type of person you are, right? I'm a relatively extroverted person, and I feel more at home at times at being in front of people, being able to interact and respond to body language. But I think online you have to bridge that gap that exists in terms of being in virtual spaces. And I think the years we've had, particularly through COVID and Zoom, have only kind of ingrained that in people. So there's, I think, four key things that I would focus on if you're doing this online. One is you just got to have to work harder to build that sense of empathy, being really kind of acknowledging that it is harder. Like we're going to work you hard. Like it's going to be difficult to do this, but I need you to bring your A game. And also just being very clear in that sense about policing the conversation. Things can feel like they get a bit more out of hand online, and people talk over each other, or technology gets in the way. And you just being very clear. My job is to police this conversation. Is to make sure everyone is heard. People will talk over each other. I make sure I'll come back to you. I think it's just really, really emphatic about that. Um, Delivering a stage performance, I see this as a slight analogy of the sense of people talk about in acting how a film kind of performance is often like because the camera's quite close, you can use quite subtle gestures and body language and things and really make an impact to communicate with people. But in a stage setting, you have to communicate with the person that's right at the back of the room. So you see stage actors very kind of elaborate and kind of over the top and such. And I think that's really similar here. I think Zoom and Teams, whatever it may be, you really have to overham it a little bit. Like you have to really use your exaggerate body language to an extent you didn't think you would in person. Like really enforce that people's value contributions are valuable. Like just dial it up a little bit more because you need to really connect with someone on the other end of a screen. Another area here is about sharpening focus. I think this is just making sure that people aren't distracted, including yourself. One tip I heard was around taking off your own camera view, the view of yourself, so that you're not a bit of a cockatoo and just kind of looking at yourself in the corner of the screen. I think we're all guilty of doing it, aren't we? Going, oh, is that what I look like today? Like you don't want that distraction. And equally, especially online, it's just setting it up from the beginning. Everyone's got cameras on. We're all going to interact with each other. No one can sit as a passenger in the background, for sure. And finally, I think part of that kind of perhaps that stage performance is just leaving no ambiguity. I think you have a bit of room in online when someone's a bit unclear to be able to take them aside, explain something, or kind of reassert yourself again. Online, it can often feel like people will be too quiet and won't tell you if something's going wrong. So I think you just need to be very, very strict on your structures. You need to be very clear on what you want of people when you want it, and using things like collaborative tools like Miro, making sure that people can add ideas and stuff to things, and little sheets, just structures like this table you've got here. You've got 10 minutes to fill it out is really key.
Yeah. I love the analogy of the stage performer. Fab. So that's kind of during a little bit just on how you sort of galvanize action and make sure that doesn't just be a successful meeting, it lives on in the business afterwards. And the first thing is just reconnect with that North Star. You've set it up before the meeting, you've introduced it again at the start. Let's loop back around at the end of the session and remind ourselves of it and sort of sense check, have we got to this? So making sure you've allowed a bit of time of prioritizing decisions, if there are some blockers, some things that are going to stop people going away and acting on this, let's talk about that now. And I think just visibly capture that. So write down what the actions are, assign kind of people or teams to them so that people feel really accountable and they go away feeling confident that they have achieved what you set out. And then lastly, end on a high. So a reminder, this is our sort of peak end rule. And I guess the danger with a lot of these meetings is you can have that amazing discussion, loads of ideas throughout, but then you can end on a low where people go, oh God, I'm overwhelmed. We've spoken
Mm,
about so much today. I'm overwhelmed. How are we possibly going to do this? I've got to go back to my desk now and do all of these other things. Um, you don't want that. You want to end on that high. So part of that is having those action plans, I think, but also prolonging that after the session. So share a follow up straight after. This is what we've discussed.
mm,
These are the action plans so that it's kind of written down, put in a follow up session afterwards so they've got a sort of checkpoint. Don't sort of risk them running
mm.
away with ideas or feeling overwhelmed. You want to carry that positivity through.
I think that's really key, isn't it? That particularly that thing of like what we've achieved, what the
Mm,
actions are as soon as possible, making
mm.
sure you don't leave that gap for them to kind of take their thoughts in another direction.
Yeah.
And also just things like how can you just create a little emotional lift? Could you just end it
Yeah.
with a little treat or something that makes people feel
Yeah.
good leaving the other room? I think it's key.
Yeah, yeah. And even, yeah, like simple things like just being that empathetic person and recognizing their contribution and their time so they do feel like really valued at the end. Fab.
So yeah, that's a whistle stop tour of the art of facilitation and such. Hopefully, that's given some food for thought there. Obviously, if you have any questions, please ping through us. We're obviously happy to help. Obviously, this is part of a series. For those who are kind of perhaps new to this, we've had several already. We've looked at sessions around kind of how predicting consumer behavior, how we do that, for particularly from a subscription lens. And obviously, that Laura and Alison have kind of run. We've also dug into what we've alluded here around kind of behavioral biases and how to adapt to those, as well as our award-winning storytelling and our approach to that, how we take data and make that a real compelling narrative to drive change. We have two more sessions that are coming up, one in February and one in April. Well, first one is around kind of Show Me the Money. It's about how we take consumer insights and turn that into pounds, right? Not just kind of saying, isn't this kind of interesting? It make it a real commercial impact to drive change in businesses. And finally, really just digging into our emotional model, being able to how we take understanding how people feel and how to influence that and affect change and ultimately drive that commercial impact through an emotional lens.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll see some of you there in future sessions. If you do want to look back at any of the past sessions, just let us know. We have that back catalogue, hopefully some really great things and useful tools. So we'll just check the Q&A, nothing in there.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for listening in.
And
Well,
yeah,
have a
take
great
care.
day.
Bye.